It's a great pleasure being here, but maybe I should answer a few of your questions that you have. Thank you very much. I work with the Lula Institute, and I've known President Lula for a long time. And I've known how he conducted himself over the 8 years that he was there. First 4 years were a complete disaster. Everything failed. And fragmentation, the type of inequality rose, jobs were not created, inflation rose. And so, yes, he did make certain decisions, but those decisions were not really splitting pro-labor and pro-business. In fact, I was in his office, and what he had constructed in his office was a very interesting cluster of sort of key officials. The type of coordination that said, we need to make some tough choices. Whether you're representing business or you're representing labor or you're representing whoever. Remember that Lula never actually had a majority in the parliament. He was the president. Parliament is very fragmented in Brazil. But what he is able to do is say very firmly, whatever we propose to do as government must answer the most fundamental question we have in Brazil. How do we put food 3 times a day on the table? That model is a great model, and that's why Zwelinzima raised it as the opportunity we have. Because Brazil, on an economic and social level, I was there in 1990, when he was just forming the Workers' Party. And their conditions were similar to us. What allows one country to go ahead and another country to stay behind? So I think those comes back to some of the tough decisions we need to make. The second question of Marikana brings that to the fore. What happened at Marikana? And it comes back to the point that I'm making, is that at the end of the day, that leadership at the mine level grew so distant from where the workers were that, in a sense, they were co-opted. And when it happened in a situation where wage bargaining, and wage bargaining is an incredibly volatile thing, and having been a negotiator for most of my life, I understand that. When you lose confidence of members that you're representing, and they begin to see you as the enemy, then that collective bargaining unit cannot survive. Then we are creating the very conditions of instability that we had in the 80s, where the police were the political tool of enforcement for an apartheid regime. And when the police become discredited in that, we should be very afraid.
Morning, Jane. I think following on that question quite a bit, you mentioned social dialogue. How do we, in business and as ordinary citizens, what do we need to do to get social dialogue going? What are the examples, the practical frameworks we can follow? What are the actions we need to be taking?
And that's where we have to get out of our comfort zones and go and find this. There's millions of our people, the vast majority of parents, of ordinary people that are South Africans, want the best thing for their children. Work with them. Whether it's through your churches, whether it is through your social clubs, whether it's through talking to people on the golf course here, get them to do something about making our country a success. We failed to take advantage of that. That's because as a state, we were not organized. And we could have worked in a way that created the type of housing development, whether it's on a rental basis, social housing, with stable communities, that would have preempted some of the conflict we see today. So these are questions, and I think that only one who can answer it is when you're sitting in a conversation and you're putting the detail on the table and you're producing the evidence of what's happening around the world, what we can learn from, and what's even happening in South Africa and what we can learn from it. On your million-dollar question, okay, first of all, I will make a suggestion to whoever becomes president rather than what I will do. You know, but I think fundamentally in our country, we have to address the issue of hope and opportunity. And in that, the most important thing we need to do is intervene in resolving the education crisis. Redesigning education in a fundamental way that gives people skills, that they're able to develop their livelihoods, they have hope that I've gone through 12 years of education, I know I'm going to have the skill. You know, one of the things I found, again with the Sidandi Foundation in India, and that extraordinary project I found, they take kids rejected by schools, and in 90 days of intensive training, they're able to teach them about presentation, about how they attire is, how they present themselves, how to use technology. 100% of them get jobs at decent salaries. In 90 days. Why can't we do that here? Isn't that the type of PE we need in this country? Isn't that the type of corporate social responsibility we need? 90 days to get someone a job who's been rejected by the education system. These are not rocket science to do. So redesigning education is fundamental to me, to giving hope to the next generation. And transparency. Getting the right people into the right jobs and holding them accountable. If you're a teacher, you should be in school teaching. If you're not, you should be subjected to discipline. Not given a golden handshake. We need the state to perform because the vast bulk of our people depend on the state. So addressing the issue of the efficiency and capacity of the state is fundamental in addressing the challenge of corruption and holding people accountable. And how do we do that? Well, I think that we can all do that. You know, we can stop being like subjects and become citizens. So, you know, I was very interested, an electrician working at my house now. So he said, oh, I was stopped by a traffic cop the other day. And he said, oh, you've done something wrong, you have to pay me a bribe. So he said, give me your badge number. And the traffic cop said, okay, you let him go. You know, this is about us becoming citizens today. We need to demand our rights, our constitutional rights. It's like these parents that went to court. It's not Section 27 that went to court. It's Section 27 was representing parents who took the government to court to say, my child is constitutionally entitled to a textbook. What has the minister denied the crisis? But the recent judgment, they acknowledge. They have to distribute textbooks for next year by December. That's about accountability. Damn it. Because the model that we are using is organic. So the first thing is that if you're looking at people who are really poor, the reason that people have been able to survive being poor and still remain relatively healthy is because of biodiversity. And biodiversity is very important in a local context. That you are not being told, well, get rid of all the other crops you're planting and just plant cotton, because you will earn something on the marketplace. And I think that's very dangerous. In fact, when I was in the villages of Bangladesh, I met some guy in a local hotel, and I said, where do you come from? He said, oh, I'm from Holland. What are you doing here? No, I represent a tobacco company. So what are you doing here? Oh, we're trying to get people to grow tobacco here. So I said, but you know, people are really poor here, they live off the land, you know, if they don't write rice, they're going to starve. No, but you know, they get money for it. And I think that's such a dangerous intervention. That's where I think, for me, that's like corporate, you know, corporates at its worst. Because they're going to accentuate household food insecurity. Because even if you look at the example in India around cotton farming, and the way in which people were promoted to grow cotton, which was basically GM cotton, and the way in which it ultimately, you know, it gave them good crops for a few years, but after then the soil fertility started to go. And then they needed fertilizers, then they needed pesticides, then they needed herbicides. And eventually it ended up in debt. And there's recorded up to like 20,000 farmer suicides in India. So, you know, this is, we've got to be very careful in how we look at interventions we make, that we don't upset the local ecosystem.